The Edward Snyder Award for National Legislative Leadership in Advancing Disarmament and Building Peace is presented to Senator Chris Murphy for his exemplary leadership in supporting a diplomatic resolution to the dispute over Iran's nuclear program, advocating for diplomacy with Iran, rejecting additional sanctions during this sensitive juncture in the negotiations, and initiating a grassroots petition against deal-breaking sanctions. We recognize, appreciate, and value Senator Murphy's political courage in speaking truth to power.
Thank you to the Friends Committee for this enormous honor. This is very, very exciting. This is a very busy day over in the United States Senate for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is that Connecticut actually has a nominee for the district court. It's going to be getting a vote in a few hours, but I wanted to make sure to be here to tell you personally how much this particular award means to me, and also to tell you in person how much my relationship with Diane has meant over the years. She was a tremendous advocate for the disenfranchised and the dispossessed in Connecticut. And we did work very closely together on this issue of building more support for supportive housing. We're now going to be building 3 times as many supportive housing units for people with physical disabilities and mental illness all across the country, in large part because of the just tremendous work that she did. And we were so upset when we heard that she was leaving until I discovered where she was coming to. We know that Connecticut's loss with respect to that specific issue's advocacy is our gain when it comes to the great work she's doing with the committee, and of course the country's gain as well. Here are my brief few words, and it's a note of thanks to your organization's decision to be so out front in promoting diplomacy, and specifically your decision to exert your influence and to devote a significant amount of energy and time in giving backing to those of us who have decided to be very upfront about our feelings with respect to the importance of these nuclear negotiations, and very upfront about what we believe to be the disastrous, cataclysmic global consequences of these negotiations failing, potentially because of congressional action that could play a role in scuttling them before they have borne fruit in the end. This is not an easy position for a lot of us to take. You know why. There are a lot of people and interests in this country that have lined up behind the idea that Congress should weigh in early when it comes to the potential consequences of these negotiations failing. But we should listen both to the people that are in the room in these negotiations who tell us consistently and loudly that additional sanctions from the United States today would greatly undermine their ability to get a deal, but we should listen to the Iranian people as well. What many of my constituents don't understand is that for all of the talk about Iran being part of the axis of evil, this is a country filled with people who are pro-American, who feel good about us despite the terrible things that their totalitarian regime says about our country. And many of those feelings were underlying their votes at polling places when they decided to go a different way and elect Rouhani with a mandate to speak to the United States, to bring Iran back into the world community. Now, we don't know if that's going to happen in the end, but when the Iranian people have gone to the ballot box and asked for a closer relationship with the West and with the international community, what kind of message would it send if in the midst of that process we slapped their wrist again with a new round of sanctions? It's a message not just to the negotiators, but it's a message to the Iranian people as well. And in the end, we're in this position today. We're in the position where we are at the final stages of negotiation because of the decision made at ballot boxes throughout Iran, and so we need to pay attention to the messages that we are sending. I have been in regular communication with the administration over the last several days about these negotiations. I can simply say that there is still a significant strain of optimism that we can get somewhere significant, if not all the way to an agreement before the deadline. I am hopeful that if we are close to an agreement, and the administration needs more time, that they will have friends that will get their back. I've chosen to be as out front as I can on this. I think I was the first member of the Senate to express reservations about the sanctions legislation when Senator Corker and Senator Rubio and others came to the floor last week to try to rush through a piece of legislation that would require congressional consent for a new deal, an extra constitutional process. I was the one who went down to the floor and registered my objection to their request to bring that up before the Senate. But knowing that you're here to support the views that many of us have makes it a little bit easier to be that vocal. Let me make one final pitch to you on a much broader sense. I am a member of the Foreign Relations Committee, and I got onto the Foreign Relations Committee in my first term in Congress, which is something that a decade or 2 decades ago you could not have done. The Foreign Relations Committee was, one of, if not the most prestigious committee in Congress, and you had to wait as a new senator for a term or maybe even more before you found a seat on that committee. Why am I able as a freshman member to be on that committee? I would like to say that it's because I'm just so damn smart and persuasive and thoughtful, but it's not. It's because there is less interest now than there has been in a long time amongst Democratic members and Republican members when it comes to playing a proactive role in setting foreign policy. Now, that's due to a lot of reasons, one of which is that Congress has just significantly abdicated its responsibility to exercise its Article I responsibility to set foreign policy in conjunction with the president. A lot of these decisions now are a lot messier than they used to be. We're not marching armies against those of another nation. We are making tougher decisions about using our armed capabilities against diffuse and shadowy enemies. But that doesn't mean that Congress isn't still obligated to play a role. That's why myself and many others are pushing for a debate this week or next week on an authorization of military force before the president proceeds any further with new troop deployments in Syria and Iraq. But speaking as a progressive, I will also tell you that it's because we are on very unsure footing right now as to what we actually believe in any longer. The most interesting foreign policy discussion happening in Congress today is happening between John McCain and Rand Paul, between neoconservatives and isolationists. And I'm not speaking for all of you, I'm speaking for myself and many other progressive members of the Senate, that neither one of those camps speaks to us. We certainly don't fall in line with the neoconservative viewpoint, but we also don't want to walk away from a role in the world. We think there is a brand of internationalism that is very different looking than what we have seen over the last 10 to 15 years, but that still has a role for the United States to play in trying to do good in the world. And it's time for us to really step forward and say that what we've seen from McCain certainly doesn't work. What we've seen from Rand Paul and isolationists, that's not where we are. And increasingly, we have differences with the administration as well. So we can't simply abdicate responsibility to the administration. We don't see the sense in arming Syrian rebels at the rate that this president desires to do so. We have problems with this administration's policy on surveillance or on secret wars, that there's room There's a place for a proactive, progressive foreign policy agenda that combines the different kind of projection of U.S. power in the world with a new humility. about what we can and what we cannot achieve, that asks questions whether we need enough nuclear weapons to blow up the world 50 times over, that says that the ratio of spending in the Department of Defense to the Department of State, well, maybe it shouldn't be 1-to-1, but it probably shouldn't be 5-to-1, that what we are doing as we speak in West Africa is a perfect example of the projection of American influence done right. Now, we still don't know what the final jury will say in terms of the trend line of Ebola in that part of the world, but we safely can say that we would have no chance at controlling that disease if it wasn't for the intervention of American doctors and nurses and public health professionals, and yes, even soldiers, helping to erect many of the facilities that are treating people in that part of the world. And so there is a different way to do this, and it's time for many progressives who have sat on the sidelines for a long time to step up to the place and have a conversation about what are the 5 or 6 principles that really underlie the way that we think America should be working in this world. You're going to help with that conversation. You may not ultimately align with where the vision that I'm talking about ends up, but the fact that you've chosen to spend a chunk of your time advocating on these issues, it makes a difference. And in a moment when there are millions of Americans turning away from public service, public activism, and even voting, as we sit just 2 weeks away from a vote that had the lowest voter turnout in a midterm election in most all of our lifetimes, you being here means even more. And I don't know if you all recite this quote in unison, and I'm just saying it again so you've heard it a million times before, but I was just, in preparing for this award named after a pretty remarkable man, ran across this quote from Edward Snyder at a Haverford College commencement that he gave about a decade ago. And he said, in speaking to the graduates, he said, "I hope that you will reject cynics who tell you the public arena is boring or corrupt or not worth your time. They want to keep you from getting involved in politics. They want to keep it a private preserve for moneyed interests controlled by high-powered lobbyists and advertising campaigns. Yes, it involves messy compromises and unsatisfactory choices, but it is the best process yet devised for making those crucial day-to-day decisions that determine the future of our nation and the planet." There's a million moments where I wonder why on earth I decided to devote the early part of my life to this business. I get up on most days and feel like I'm banging my head up against the wall and seeing absolutely no movement in that edifice. But then there are those moments where I see that little crack run down the wall, where our foreign policy starts to make a little bit more sense than it did 10 years ago, or where by my neighbors all of a sudden, who have been on the outside of the healthcare system for their entire life, finally have access to an affordable product, where I realize that, you know what, advocacy does make a difference. The contribution of me and of thousands of others who come down here, maybe only for a week or a weekend, can move this place every now and again. I'm an optimist by nature, and you sort of have to be to do this job. But every time that I'm in a room with people who have committed some portion of their life to trying to make the world a slightly better place, especially now as the father, as Diane mentioned, of 2 little boys, I'm more optimistic about my ability to stick with it despite the frustrations. What a wonderful honor to have this award named after a pretty amazing man. I look forward to a long partnership with the Friends Committee, not just because Diane's there, but because you're there as well. Thank you very much for having me today.